At dinner, my son's wife slammed her fork down and said, "I've been disgusted with you since day one." I paused mid-bite. My son just stared at his plate, silent. I looked around the table, no one defended me. I raised this boy, fed him with hands cracked from working 2 jobs, and now his wife had the nerve to humiliate me in my own home. And he said nothing. That was the moment I realized, I was no longer family. Just an old man in the way. My wife Marjorie used to say, a house doesn't become a home until it hears laughter and arguments and forgiveness. Ours heard plenty of all 3. We bought the place in 1981, a modest 2-bedroom tucked behind a grove of oaks, with a leaning porch and a stubborn front gate. It wasn't much, but I fixed it up with my own hands. Every nail I drove in, every pipe I replaced, I did it knowing it was where my son would grow up. Where Marjorie and I would grow old. Ethan was born 2 years after we moved in. I still remember the way his tiny fist wrapped around my pinky like it meant something. From the beginning, I loved him in a way that scared me. I worked long hours at the auto shop, 10, 12 hours some days, and came home with grease in my hair and aches in my back. But one gurgle from that crib and I forgot the pain. Marjorie was the soul of the house. She could make a meal stretch through the week and still make it feel like a feast. She taught Ethan to read before he even started school. Her voice was calm, but firm. When she was around, the house was more than safe, it was sacred. She didn't need to raise her voice to be heard. I was a harder man, maybe. Not cruel, but stern. I believed in chores, consequences, standing when someone entered the room. Ethan used to say, "Why do I gotta say, 'Yes sir,' to you? You're not a teacher." I just grin and say, "Respect starts at home, son." Still, I never hit him. Never raised my voice unless it was to call him in for dinner. I tried to be the father I never had, present, sober, dependable. Every year on his birthday, I'd take a day off work and make him pancakes shaped like dinosaurs, no matter how old he got. He'd grown by the time he was 16, but he always ate every bite. We weren't rich, but we got by. Vacations were road trips to the lake, not flights overseas. Christmas was handmade gifts and a tree from the discount lot. But Ethan never wanted for anything, at least, not until college. That's when the first small fractures started to form. He wanted to go out of state, some fancy liberal arts school in Vermont. Tuition was more than what I made in a year. Marjorie and I sat at the kitchen table for weeks crunching numbers, praying over statements. In the end, I sold the plot of land I'd inherited from my uncle, the one I'd planned to build a cabin on for retirement. "Don't worry about us," I told him when we drove him up there in our rattling pickup. "You just focus on becoming someone decent." I watched him walk across that campus, duffel bag over his shoulder, eyes full of something I couldn't name. Pride, maybe. Or distance. When he came home during breaks, things felt different. He talked faster, used words I didn't understand. He seemed irritated by our routines, our small-town habits. "You still get your news from the paper," he once laughed. Marjorie just smiled and poured him tea. She never argued, just listened. Sometimes I wondered if she saw the shift too, but she never said. After college, Ethan got a job in marketing and moved back to town temporarily. That's when he introduced us to Megan. She came over for dinner wearing heels on our muddy walkway and turned up her nose at the green bean casserole like it was a crime scene. She barely touched her food. Said it was too heavy. But Marjorie, ever gracious, asked her questions about her job, her interests. Megan spoke in long, polished sentences about branding strategy and network synergy. I didn't understand half of it, but I kept nodding. "She's ambitious," I said that night as Marjorie and I washed dishes. "She's not the girl I pictured for him," she admitted. "But maybe she's what he needs now." They got married the following spring. I built them a garden bench from reclaimed wood, engraved with their initials. Megan thanked me politely but barely looked at it. Ethan didn't say much either, just clapped me on the back and said, "You're always building stuff, huh?" After the wedding, things moved quickly. Megan got pregnant, then lost the baby at 5 months. She shut down after that, barely spoke to anyone. Ethan stopped visiting, then called to say they'd be moving in with us for just a few months, while they saved for a house. Marjorie welcomed them without hesitation. I had my doubts, privacy, space, tension, but I held my tongue. It was our son. Of course we'd help him. Those first few weeks were manageable. Megan stayed in their room most days, Ethan worked long hours. Marjorie cooked for everyone, made sure I had my evening tea just like always. But I noticed things. Megan would turn the thermostat way up and leave lights on all night. She rearranged the kitchen, moving Marjorie's spices without asking. Little things that stung more than they should have. Then Marjorie got sick. At first it was fatigue, then coughing, then the doctor said it was late-stage cancer. 6 months, maybe less. I remember Megan standing in the corner of the hospital room, arms crossed like she had somewhere else to be. Ethan cried, I held Marjorie's hand, and Megan looked at the clock. After Marjorie passed, everything changed. The light went out of the house. Megan moved into the master bedroom without asking. Ethan said, "It makes more sense now, Dad." I started sleeping in the guest room. Alone. Quiet. My world shrunk to a recliner and a TV that never got turned on. Meals became leftovers, conversations became one-word responses. Megan took over more, chores, finances, even mail. It was no longer my home. It was theirs. And I had become a guest in the house I built. But I didn't speak up. Not yet. It started with the tea. Marjorie always made me a cup every night at 8 p.m. on the dot, chamomile with honey and a splash of lemon. After she passed, I kept that ritual alive, even if the tea didn't taste the same. One evening, I walked into the kitchen to find Megan tossing my tea mug into the garbage. "Cracked," she said without looking up from her phone. I picked it out. There was no crack, just a faded rim, a little chip on the handle, but still good. I set it on the counter and said, "This was Marjorie's favorite." Megan raised an eyebrow. "It's unsanitary." From then on, little things disappeared, old pots, framed photos, Marjorie's knitting basket. Once, I found her wedding ring dish shoved in the back of a drawer under Megan's curling iron. Ethan didn't seem to notice. He was always on his laptop or at work late. When he did talk, it was short, functional. "Dad, did you pay the water bill? You used the last of the milk. Megan's got a migraine, can you keep the TV down?" They started locking their bedroom door. I wasn't trying to snoop, but one night I walked past and heard Megan saying, "He's just lingering around all the time. Watching." Then Ethan's voice, lower, "He's lonely. He'll come around." Come around to what? I tried to stay out of their way. I watered the lawn, fixed the leaky faucet, even started sleeping earlier to avoid bumping into them. Still, Megan seemed irritated whenever I was around. One morning, she came into the kitchen in a silk robe and sighed loudly when she saw me eating toast. "Do you always have to eat breakfast right here?" I glanced up. "It's my house." She tilted her head. "Is it, though?" That one stuck. Later that week, I opened a drawer in the living room to get batteries and found a manila envelope labeled, "Refinance, Title Transfer." My name was on the documents. Ethan's was listed as, "Primary Resident." I didn't say anything. Not yet. But I watched more closely after that. They began treating the house like theirs. Megan had a delivery service bring in a new couch, sleek, gray, sharp-edged. Said it fit the aesthetic. My recliner, the one Marjorie gave me on my 60th birthday, got shoved into the garage. I'll bring it back in, I said. Megan didn't even pause as she walked past. Only if we can donate it afterward. One Sunday, they hosted a dinner party for Ethan's coworkers. I wasn't invited. Just told, it'll be better if you stay in your room, less confusing for the guests. So I sat upstairs listening to laughter drift up from the floor I paid for. I heard Megan telling someone I was old-fashioned, that he means well, but he's set in his ways. After the guests left, I came downstairs for a drink of water. Megan was wiping down the counters, wearing a silk blouse and that practiced smile. She glanced over her shoulder and said, "You looked lonely up there. Ever consider joining a community? One of those active living places?" I stared at her. "You mean a home?" She shrugged. "You'd probably have more people your age around. And space. We're kind of tight here." Tight. In a 4-bedroom house. I built that porch with my own hands, and now I was crowding them. Ethan walked in at that moment, loosened his tie, and gave me a tired smile. "Dad, don't be upset. Megan's just thinking long-term." Long-term for who? I nodded and went to my room, where I sat in the dark for a long time, staring at the ceiling fan spin. The next morning, my Sunday paper was missing. I found it ripped up in the recycling bin, wet coffee grounds all over the front page. Megan walked by sipping almond milk from a mason jar. "Newspapers are outdated," she said. "We're trying to declutter." I finally said something. "You don't throw away a man's history to make room for your trends." She stopped, looked at me, then slowly replied, "Maybe the man should move on with it, then." That afternoon, I went out back to sit in the garden, the one Marjorie tended for decades. Roses, snapdragons, lilies. Megan had started talking about converting it into a minimalist rock area for entertaining. Said it was too chaotic. I looked at the empty planter where Marjorie's forget-me-nots used to bloom. She planted them for her sister who died young. They didn't survive the last re-landscaping. I sat there until dusk, unmoving. I could hear Megan laughing from the open kitchen window. The shift had already happened. I just hadn't admitted it yet. I thought back to Ethan at 10 years old, asking me to read Charlotte's Web again even though he already knew how it ended. He used to beg for stories of how Marjorie and I met, how I proposed under the rain-soaked roof of her dad's barn. He loved those stories once. Now, he barely made eye contact. Said thanks like it was a chore. Still, I didn't want to believe it. I told myself maybe they were stressed. Maybe they were grieving in their own way. Maybe I was being sensitive. But deep down, I knew. Something had changed. And it wasn't just the house. It was the way Megan walked through rooms like she owned the air, the way Ethan deferred to her with every look, the way silence followed me wherever I went. I was no longer the father. No longer the host. I was just the echo of someone they'd already decided to leave behind. The night I truly knew I didn't belong anymore came not with a scream, but with a laugh. It was Megan's birthday. Ethan planned a dinner party, small, upscale, catered. He didn't ask me to help, didn't even mention it until the day before. "We're doing a little thing for Megan tomorrow," he said as he passed me in the hallway, tying his shoes. "Just a few folks. No pressure to attend, but you're welcome to eat early, before everyone gets here." Eat early. Like a tenant in his own basement suite. I didn't respond. Just nodded and went to my room, closed the door. I sat on the bed for a long time, my hands trembling slightly, not from age, but something colder, more final. The next evening, I came downstairs dressed in a clean sweater, pressed pants. If I was going to be invisible, I'd at least be dignified. Megan was arranging wine glasses, wearing something that probably cost more than our old car. She looked me up and down like I was a misplaced coat. "You're staying?" she asked, feigning surprise. I thought I might, I said simply, easing into the far corner of the room. Ethan didn't say anything. Just gave me a tight smile and returned to lighting candles. Guests trickled in, colleagues, couples, one woman who wore sunglasses indoors. They sipped wine, nibbled on cheese cubes arranged like a chessboard. I sat quietly, smiling when appropriate, listening. Then the moment came. Someone asked Megan what it was like living with the in-laws. She gave a little laugh, flicked her hair, and said, "Oh, Henry? He's fine. Mostly harmless. I mean, I've been disgusted with him since day one, but what can you do?" The room went quiet for a split second, then a few awkward chuckles followed. Megan sipped her wine. Ethan said nothing. Nothing. No defense. No glance in my direction. Just silence. I didn't react. I didn't move. I sat there with my hands folded in my lap, the same way I used to sit when the pastor would lecture us about turning the other cheek. But inside me, something cracked. Not loudly. Quietly. Like a shelf warping under years of weight. After the guests had gone, Megan started clearing glasses. Ethan busied himself in the kitchen. I stood up and said, "I'd like a word." She turned, brow arched. "Now?" "Yes. Now." Ethan stepped forward, hands raised slightly. "Dad, maybe it's not the best time." "I wasn't talking to you," I said, my voice steady. "But since you're here, it might save time." Megan leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "All right. Go ahead." "You humiliated me tonight," I said. "Not by accident. Not with a joke that went wrong. You knew exactly what you were saying." She didn't blink. "You don't get to play the victim every time someone points out the truth." I felt my hands tightening at my sides. "The truth? That you've resented me since the day you moved in? That everything in this house reminds you that it doesn't belong to you?" Her lip curled slightly. "It doesn't. Not really. You're just clinging to old bricks and dust. You live in the past." Ethan finally spoke. "Dad, we're trying to live our lives here. You've got your ways, and we've got ours. That's just how it is." I looked at him, really looked, and for a moment, I didn't recognize the man who once called me his hero. He didn't look angry. He looked tired. Indifferent. And that hurt worse than if he'd slapped me. I turned away without another word and walked back to my room. I closed the door, locked it, and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor. That was when I knew. They weren't waiting for me to pass. They weren't tolerating me out of kindness. They were slowly erasing me, one mug, one memory, one insult at a time. Later that week, I went to the garage to look for some old photo albums. I found them buried under boxes of Megan's clothes, holiday decorations, and a coffee maker still in its packaging. Marjorie's photo albums, water-stained, bent, and forgotten. I flipped through them, pages sticking slightly. Pictures of Ethan as a toddler in overalls, Marjorie holding him on a blanket in the park, our first Christmas in the house. A life full of effort. Full of intention. Discarded like trash. I stayed in the garage for hours. I think part of me hoped Megan would come out looking for me, maybe apologize. But the door never opened. That night, as I placed the albums gently back on the shelf, I noticed a folder on top of Megan's labeled "Long-Term Plan, Henry." I opened it. Inside were brochures for senior living facilities. A typed list, steps to transition Henry, what to say, options for financing, and in her handwriting, possible power of attorney, ask Ethan to bring up casually. My heart didn't break. It folded. Not because of the betrayal, but because they didn't even think I'd notice. I walked upstairs with the folder in hand and sat at the kitchen table. Ethan came in an hour later, coat slung over one shoulder. He saw the papers, his face stiffened. "Where did you?" "I built this house," I said, softly. "Every wall. Every tile. And now I know exactly what you both think of me." "Dad." "I'm not yelling," I interrupted. "I'm not even surprised. I just want you to remember one thing, Ethan, when people remove you from their hearts, they often forget that you're still watching." I got up, walked past him, and went to bed. That night, I didn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, thinking of Marjorie. What would she say? Would she have seen this coming? Or was I the blind one all along? In the silence of that room, I made a promise to her memory. They would not win by wearing me down. If they wanted a war of silence, I'd give them one. But not the way they expected. The house was too quiet after that night. Ethan didn't speak to me for 2 days, not even a glance as he came and went. Megan whistled while she packed donation boxes. I noticed my books were gone from the shelf in the den. Later, I found them stacked near the front door, labeled, library or dump. They had stopped pretending. That was the real shift. One morning, I was walking past their bedroom, door cracked open, voices low. I shouldn't have listened, but I did. "He's not going to leave willingly," Megan said. Ethan sighed. "Then we need to push it. A medical scare, maybe. Something that forces him into a facility for his own good." Facility. I leaned closer. "Get power of attorney," she said. "You're his son. It won't be hard. We can say he's forgetting things, that he's unsafe. He already talks to himself." I backed away slowly, heart pounding. It wasn't just neglect. It wasn't resentment. It was a plan. I went to the basement that afternoon and found my old fireproof safe. Inside, I still had the deed, insurance documents, Marjorie's will, and my own half-finished one. My hands trembled as I pulled them out. Later that evening, I stood on the back porch with Marjorie's photo in hand, her garden behind me, now half dug up for Megan's landscaping dreams. I whispered, "They're not just waiting me out. They're removing me one piece at a time." That night, I started writing everything down. Dates, comments, changes to the house. What they moved, what they said, how they treated me. Not just to remember, but to prove I had remembered. In my own handwriting. Every day. I called Mr. Kessler the next morning, our family lawyer, retired but still sharp. "You free for a conversation, George?" I asked. I think it's time I made my intentions known. He met me 2 days later at the town cafe. When I told him what was happening, he looked me in the eye and said, "You're not the first father to sit in that chair with this kind of story." "What kind of story is that?" "One where the children think your age means you've stopped mattering." I handed him the folder of documents. "I want to protect the house. If they're going to forget who built it, I want the foundation to remember me." George nodded. "We can do that. But Henry, be sure." I've never been more sure of anything. That night, I stayed up late reading Marjorie's letters again, little notes she used to leave for me in my lunchbox. One of them simply said, "Don't forget how strong you are when you're quiet." I smiled. That's when I stopped playing defense. I began observing them the way a soldier watches a storm coming, carefully, quietly, and with a plan in mind. One afternoon, Megan left her laptop open on the kitchen table. I'd never touched her things before, but I made an exception. There it was, a typed list called Next Steps, Spring. Bullet points that read: Finish patio conversion. Start legal process, consult with Evan. Draft new will suggestion template. Approach Henry with nursing home options. She even had links to facilities bookmarked, places miles away, tucked behind office parks with names like Golden Creek and Whispering Pines. It wasn't just a plan. It was a timeline. I closed the laptop gently and walked back to my room. I sat in the old rocker Marjorie used to use for her crocheting and stared at the wall for what must have been an hour. My life wasn't slipping away. It was being stripped. That evening, I wrote something new in my journal, not just what happened, but how it made me feel. I don't miss my son. I miss the boy who used to hold my hand crossing the street. And that's when the idea first came to me. Not revenge. I don't believe in that word. But justice? Emotional clarity? A chance to tell the truth without shouting? Yes. That, I could do. I started making copies, documents, journals, receipts, letters. I scanned everything and mailed it to a trusted friend in Oregon, with instructions to keep them safe. I visited the bank and added security questions to my accounts. I made a notarized statement about the behavior in the house and stored it with Mr. Kessler. And every night, I rehearsed in my mind what I would say if the moment came. Then one day, it did. I walked into the kitchen and saw Megan standing over the stove with her Bluetooth headset on. Just one push, she was saying. One outburst, and we can say he's unstable. She turned, startled to see me, but I smiled politely. Good morning, I said. She blinked. Oh. Morning. Then she went back to stirring her soup like she hadn't just exposed her playbook. I knew then that I couldn't afford to wait anymore. I had to be ready for their next move. Because it was coming. They weren't just planning around me. They were planning against me. And they'd underestimated one thing. I may have been quiet. But I wasn't finished. Speech balloon. Have you ever felt betrayed by your own family? Let us know in the comments. I waited for the right moment to confront them. Not with anger, anger would give them what they wanted. They were trying to provoke me, to get me to explode. One loud outburst, one snapped sentence, and they could call it instability. So I waited. One morning, after a particularly chilly breakfast where Megan didn't acknowledge my presence at all, I followed Ethan outside as he carried trash to the curb. His shoulders slumped. He looked older than his years, stressed, drawn out. I stepped beside him and said quietly, "You think I don't know what's happening?" He froze, trash bag dangling in his hand. "Dad. I know about the folder. I know about the nursing homes. About the legal planning. About Megan's phone calls." He turned slowly, eyes wide. How did you? "I built this house," I said. "You don't live in it without learning how to listen through walls." He stared at me for a moment, then dropped the trash bag with a sigh. "Look, it's not what you think. Megan's she worries. About your health. You've been forgetful." "No," I said. "I've been quiet." "That's not the same thing." He looked away. "You don't make it easy, Dad. You're stubborn. You hold on to things, old furniture, old routines, old ways of thinking." "You mean I remember where I come from?" There was silence between us. Then Ethan muttered, "Maybe it's time we all moved on." That was the moment. The break. Not just from my son, but from the illusion of what he was. I didn't reply. I walked back to the house and shut the door behind me. And for the first time since Marjorie died, I felt something harden inside me. That afternoon, I made another visit to Mr. Kessler. "I want to make sure everything's in place," I said. "No loopholes. No arguments. No claims from anyone who doesn't deserve it." He nodded. "It's all done. If they try to contest, the assets go to the Veteran Literacy Fund." Ironclad. We sat in silence for a moment. Then he added, "You sure about this?" I nodded slowly. "Ethan made his choices. I'm just making mine." That night, I sat out on the back porch. The garden still looked foreign, more like a showroom than a place of memory. But I still found peace in the air, in the stars above that hadn't changed, no matter how much my home had. Mrs. Abrams from next door stopped by. She was in her 70s, still sharp as a tack. "I haven't seen you much lately," she said, leaning over the fence. "Been keeping quiet," I replied. She hesitated. "You all right, Henry?" I gave her a small smile. "Getting there." She nodded. "Just know, you're not the only one who sees what's going on." That surprised me. She glanced toward the house and lowered her voice. "My niece came by last month while your son was out. Said Megan talked to her about taking over the place. Acting like it was already theirs." I felt a heat rise in my chest. Mrs. Abrams squeezed my arm gently. "You built a life here, Henry. You still have one." That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling fan, thinking of all the years I spent trying to be a good man. A steady provider. A quiet husband. A present father. I thought that would be enough. But I was learning the hard truth: kindness, if unguarded, can be mistaken for weakness. The next day, Megan walked into the living room where I was reading and said, casually, "We've booked a tour of a facility next week. Just to check things out." I looked up slowly. "For whom?" She blinked. "Well, for you, of course." I set my book down. "No. You haven't." She smiled tightly. "Ethan thought you might feel that way. But we're just exploring options. No decisions yet." I stood. "You've already made them." "Excuse me?" "You and Ethan. You've decided that I'm no longer useful, no longer sharp, no longer part of this house." She rolled her eyes. "Oh please, don't be dramatic." "No," I said. "You don't get to tell me how to feel anymore. You don't get to insult me in front of guests. You don't get to throw away my memories and call it decluttering. And you certainly don't get to send me away like some unwanted pet." Her face turned red. "Ethan." I raised my hand. "Call him. Or don't. It doesn't matter. I've already made arrangements." She frowned. "What arrangements?" I smiled, not cruelly, just calmly. "You'll see soon enough." That wiped the smirk off her face. That evening, I packed a small suitcase and took a taxi to my old friend Harold's place. Just for the weekend, I told him. Just long enough to clear my head. He welcomed me without hesitation. As I sat on his back patio with a cup of lukewarm coffee, Harold looked over and said, "You're planning something, aren't you?" I nodded. "Not revenge. Just the truth. Out loud. In front of the right people." He chuckled. "Well, it's about time. Let me know if you need help." And for the first time in months, I felt something real: clarity. I wasn't just going to let them erase me quietly. I was going to remind them, publicly, unmistakably, of exactly who I was. And more importantly, who I still am. It took me 3 tries to step inside Kessler's office again. The first time, I sat in the parking lot for 15 minutes and drove away. The second time, I parked, walked to the door, then turned around when I saw a young couple inside, probably planning their first home, hopeful and glowing. I couldn't stomach that kind of innocence that day. But the third time, I went in. The office hadn't changed much: same worn rug, same ticking clock above the bookshelf, same faint scent of lemon cleaner and old paper. George Kessler sat behind his desk with a fresh yellow legal pad, his pen already uncapped. "You sure you're ready?" he asked. I nodded. "Ready enough." He offered me a seat. I didn't take it right away. Instead, I walked to the window and looked out at the same town I'd spent my whole life in. So much had changed, but the trees along Main Street still bent the same way in the wind. "I used to walk Marjorie down that sidewalk every Saturday morning," I said quietly. "Before Ethan was born. We'd stop at the bakery, get a shared cinnamon roll and 2 coffees. She'd always let me have the middle bite." George smiled gently. "She was a good woman." "She was the best part of me," I said. "And I don't think Ethan ever saw that." "Not really." I finally sat down, letting the old chair creak beneath me. I took a breath and began the process I never thought I'd have to do under such painful circumstances. "I want the house and all attached assets to go to the Jefferson County Veterans Literacy Foundation," I said. "Upon my death, unless otherwise designated through an updated codicil." George raised an eyebrow. "That's the whole estate?" "Everything." He paused. "Ethan's your only child." "I know. And he's getting nothing?" I hesitated. "Not nothing. He'll get a letter. In my handwriting. I want it sealed and given to him privately, after." George scribbled silently, not arguing. Not judging. He knew. I added, "Include a contest clause. If he challenges the will or any part of the estate, it voids the entire inheritance and defaults to charity." He nodded again, firm and understanding. That part was done in less than 20 minutes. The hard part came after, when he pushed a different folder toward me. "You wrote a draft a few years ago. Before Megan. Before all this." I opened the folder. There, in my own neat handwriting, was a will that left everything to Ethan. I had even written a personal note at the bottom: "This house was built with love. May you fill it with more." I stared at it for a long time. My throat tightened. I had forgotten I ever wrote those words. That version of me, the one who still believed his son would do right, felt like a stranger now. I reached for a pen and signed the new version. No fanfare. No ceremony. Just a name. Mine. I leaned back and exhaled. George said softly, "This isn't something you do lightly." "I don't," I agreed. "But I also won't reward betrayal. I taught Ethan better than that." There was a long silence. Then I asked, "You remember the day I brought Ethan to meet you for the first time? He was 8, wore that tiny tie." George smiled. He sat on the edge of his seat like he was in court. I laughed softly. "He told me he wanted to be a lawyer. Said he'd fight for people who couldn't fight for themselves." "Do you think he still believes that?" I shook my head. "I think he forgot." We talked a little longer, finalizing details. Then George handed me an envelope with a copy of the new will and said, "Keep this somewhere safe. And make sure someone you trust knows where it is." I nodded. I was halfway home when I pulled over to the side of the road. I didn't cry, exactly, but my eyes burned. I sat with my hands on the steering wheel, remembering the last time I cried in front of Marjorie, years ago, when I lost my job and thought I'd failed her. She cupped my face and said, "You are not your paycheck. You are the man who keeps showing up." That memory came back so clearly, I almost heard her voice again. When I got home, I pulled out the old photo album from the garage, carefully cleaned now, placed on my dresser. I flipped through it and stopped at a picture of Ethan, 6 years old, asleep on my chest in the recliner. Marjorie had taken it while we both dozed after a long day of fishing. We looked peaceful. I wrote the letter to Ethan that night. It wasn't angry. It wasn't dramatic. Just, honest. "Son, I loved you before you knew what love was. I changed your diapers, taught you to ride a bike, held you when you cried. I gave you my strength even when I had none left. But I cannot give you this house, because you no longer remember what it was built from." I signed it, folded it, and sealed it in an envelope. Then I put it in the safe beside Marjorie's rosary. The house was still quiet. Megan and Ethan were gone that weekend, attending some kind of work retreat. It was the perfect time to walk through each room and remember what each wall had seen. The hallway where Ethan scraped his knee chasing the dog. The kitchen where Marjorie danced barefoot on Sundays. The bedroom where she said goodbye. I whispered, "This house is more than wood and nails. It's everything you and I poured into it." I felt her near, just for a second. And I knew, whatever happened next, I had already won something back. My dignity. Speech balloon. Do you think the father made the right choice? Comment and don't forget to like and subscribe for more true life stories. When they came back from their weekend retreat, I knew something had shifted. The way Ethan walked in, relaxed, confident, a little too comfortable. Megan was on the phone before her coat hit the hanger, pacing through the kitchen with a business-like gleam in her eyes. I sat quietly in the living room, pretending to read the paper. But I was listening. "Yes, we're moving forward," she said into the phone. "Once he's situated, we'll get everything retitled. No resistance expected. He's passive." Passive. I closed the paper. That evening, Ethan knocked gently on my door, carrying a small plate with 2 slices of pizza on it. "Hey Dad," he said, smiling like a Boy Scout, "thought you might be hungry." I looked at the plate, then at him. "What is it you want, son?" He blinked. "What?" "I've lived with you long enough to know when something's being buttered up for a reason." He scratched his neck, glancing over his shoulder like Megan might be watching. We're worried. You've seemed tired lately. You're not going out much." Megan found this wonderful place, only a few minutes away, great staff. "There it is," I murmured. "What?" "There's the pitch." His smile faltered. "It's not a pitch, Dad. It's an option. Just, give it some thought." I didn't answer. Just took the plate, closed the door slowly, and set it on my nightstand untouched. Later that night, I heard Megan rummaging through drawers in the hallway. I peeked out and saw her standing with Ethan near the closet, holding a measuring tape. "This space is perfect," she whispered. "We can turn it into a wellness room. My yoga mat fits perfectly by the window." Ethan nodded. "We'll move his things out this week." I didn't sleep at all after that. The next morning, Megan cornered me in the kitchen while Ethan showered. We found an assisted living suite that offers on-site medical and recreation. Very modern. Your own kitchenette and everything. I stared at her. "You already scheduled the tour, didn't you?" She smiled. "It's not an eviction. It's an upgrade." I walked past her and into the hallway. My hands were shaking, not from fear, not even from anger. Just weariness. Deep, bone-tired weariness. The kind that comes when someone you love tells you they're done pretending. I went back into my room, locked the door, and opened the safe. Pulled out the documents, the letter, the will. I stared at them for a long time, running my fingers over the envelope like it could talk me down. Then I picked up the phone and made a call. "Mrs. Jennings? I know it's short notice, but is that extra room at the church available this weekend?" The next day, I packed everything important, the photo albums, Marjorie's rosary, my records, and the documents. I left behind everything else. The furniture. The gifts I once gave Ethan. Even the armchair I loved. Because I knew I'd never sit in it again. I left before dawn, sliding a note under Ethan's door. "Gone for a few days. Don't touch my things. I'll be back." Then I drove to the church, where Mrs. Jennings greeted me with a long, silent hug and a spare key. The room was small but warm, clean sheets, a little writing desk, and a window that overlooked the garden Marjorie once helped plant in the back lot years ago. I slept better that night than I had in months. The next day, I returned briefly, while I knew they'd be out, and retrieved the last of my files. I found Megan's vision board on the dining table, photos of yoga studios, meditation corners, and what looked like a new kitchen layout. There, scribbled at the bottom, Henry's room equals future office? They didn't expect me to resist. They expected silence. Resignation. But what they were getting was calculation. I wasn't going to fight them with fists or threats. I had something stronger: truth, evidence, and the law on my side. And a plan. Back at the church, I called Mr. Kessler and told him the time had come. I'm attending their anniversary dinner, I said. And I'm not going as a guest. I'm going as a witness. You sure you want to do this publicly? He asked. I nodded. They embarrassed me in front of guests. They disrespected my wife's memory in our own home. Now it's time the people they admire see who they really are. He didn't argue. I spent the next few days preparing, printing documents, labeling timelines, gathering Megan's open laptop screenshots I'd discreetly photographed. All the whispers, the mockery, the manipulation, they weren't just memories now. They were evidence. My final act was writing one more note, this time to Megan. You should have asked me to leave with honesty. Instead, you tried to erase me. Now you'll see that the quietest man in the room is often the one with the loudest truth. I sealed it in an envelope and placed it where I knew she'd find it, inside her yoga mat bag. The stage was set. I wasn't scared. Not anymore. Because I wasn't confronting them to get my home back. I was confronting them to get myself back. The anniversary dinner was at the same house I had built with my bare hands, my home, now barely recognizable under Megan's decor and sterile taste. They hadn't even changed the locks. I guess they never thought I'd come back. I waited until the guests had arrived. Cars lined the street, laughter filtered through the windows. Megan's voice carried from the patio, smooth, confident, full of charm. Ethan laughed too, the way he used to when he was trying too hard to impress someone. I walked up the driveway slow and steady, cane in one hand, a leather folder in the other. Inside, the house was filled with people dressed in silk and slacks, holding glasses of wine that cost more than my monthly grocery bill. They all turned when I entered. Some smiled politely, others looked confused. Megan spotted me first. Her expression froze. "Henry, we weren't expecting you." "I know," I said, my voice calm. "But I figured, 10 years is worth celebrating." Ethan stood behind her, face paling slightly. "Dad." I walked to the center of the room. "Don't worry. I'm not staying long. Just wanted to share a few words before I go." A hush fell over the room. Conversations died. Even the music in the background seemed to fade into the walls. I opened the folder. "This house was built in 1981, I began. By me. Every nail, every beam, every patch of drywall was touched by my hand. My wife, Marjorie, filled it with warmth, laughter, and love. We raised our son here. We survived grief here. We grew old here." I looked around the room, making eye contact with each stunned face. But in the last year, this house has become something else. A battleground for silence. A stage for quiet cruelty. Megan stepped forward. "Henry, I really think." I held up a hand. "Please. You'll get your turn." I took out the first document, a printed email Megan had sent to a real estate agent. "This is a message from Megan, inquiring about listing the house once Henry is placed in long-term care. Sent 2 weeks ago." Gasps rippled across the room. I continued, pulling out my notes. "These are transcripts of overheard conversations. Discussions about power of attorney, forged timelines, property conversion." Megan turned red, then pale. "This is a private family matter," she snapped. "Not anymore," I said. You made it public the moment you humiliated me at your last dinner party. You laughed at me in front of strangers. You dismissed me like old furniture. Well, I'm not your decoration. I'm the foundation of this family. I pulled out one final sheet. And this is the new will. Dated, signed, and notarized. This house, my savings, every last cent, goes to charity. Specifically, a veterans literacy fund Marjorie supported. Ethan finally found his voice. You're disinheriting me? I'm giving you exactly what you gave me, I said. Nothing. A silence thicker than concrete filled the room. People shifted uncomfortably. A few guests put down their drinks. One woman whispered something to her husband and started heading for the door. I looked at Megan. You treated this house like a trophy you hadn't earned. And you thought if you smiled wide enough, no one would notice the rot underneath. Then I turned to Ethan. My son. I taught you to fish. To change a tire. To keep your promises. And somewhere along the way, you forgot. You forgot who loved you before you could even walk. His lips parted, but he didn't speak. He looked like a man suddenly realizing he'd stepped into a fire without noticing the heat. I stepped toward the door, folder still in hand. I'll be moving permanently into a space where I'm welcome. You won't need to worry about nursing homes, or inheritance. You've been freed of that burden. Then I paused. But before I go, let me leave you with this: silence is the loudest betrayal. And you were silent when it mattered most. And with that, I left. No one followed me. Outside, the night was calm. Crickets chirped. The air was cool on my face. For the first time in a long time, my steps felt light. I didn't look back. Do you think the father made the right choice? Comment and don't forget to like and subscribe for more true life stories. The morning after the dinner, I woke up to sunlight filtering through the lace curtains at the church room. The bed was stiff, the blanket thin, but I slept deeper than I had in months. There were no raised voices. No distant clatter of dishes I hadn't touched. No whispers in the hallway or footsteps that slowed when they passed my door. Just silence. But this time, it wasn't the kind that crushed me. It was the kind that made space. I sat at the little desk and poured myself a cup of black coffee from the thermos Mrs. Jennings had left for me. The note with it read simply, "Proud of you. L." I stared at those words for a long time. The town buzzed quickly. By midday, I'd already run into 3 neighbors who said, "Heard you made quite a statement last night." Mrs. Abrams waved at me from her porch, her face unreadable. Then she smiled. Just slightly. Even at the bakery, where I stopped for a cinnamon roll, the first one I'd had in years, Clara behind the counter leaned in and whispered, "About time someone stood up to that girl." Word had spread. Megan and Ethan's social performance was slipping. I hadn't meant to cause a scandal, but truth has a way of echoing louder when it's been buried for too long. I returned to the church and took a long walk around the back garden. The late blooms were still hanging on, just barely. Dried around the edges, but stubborn. Like me. That afternoon, a knock came at the church door. It was Harold, my friend from years back who used to help me patch roofs in the summer. He held 2 cups of coffee and a brown bag. "Figured you might be tired of holy toast," he said with a grin. We sat on the back steps, eating in silence. Then he said, "You know, I think you saved yourself from something worse." "How do you mean?" "That house was trying to turn you into a ghost. You left before it finished." I nodded. "I almost let it." He looked out at the garden. "You thought standing up for yourself would be the hardest part. But what you did was harder." "What's that?" "You left your son behind. Not physically. Emotionally. That's a wound most men don't survive." I didn't say anything for a while. Just listen to the breeze in the grass. You think I was wrong? I finally asked. Harold shook his head. I think you were right. And I think it's going to hurt like hell anyway. He patted my knee and left without another word. Later that evening, I pulled out the envelope again, the one with the letter to Ethan. I read it one more time, then tucked it away. Not everything needed to be reopened. Instead, I picked up my journal and began writing again. This time, not about betrayal. But about the feeling of sitting in the garden. About the smell of cinnamon and coffee in a quiet kitchen. About the memory of Marjorie's laughter through a screen door in 1985. I was remembering who I was before all the silence began. That night, as I stood brushing my teeth in the small sink across from my bed, a soft knock tapped at the door. I opened it to find Emma, my granddaughter. She stood in a hoodie and jeans, holding a grocery bag in one hand and a notebook in the other. "Hi, Grandpa," she said. It took everything in me not to cry right then. "I hope it's okay," she added. "Dad doesn't know I'm here." I stepped aside. "Come in." She sat on the edge of the bed, looked around the room, then handed me the bag. Inside were oatmeal cookies, peanut butter, a jar of strawberry jam, my favorites, always had been. "I remembered," she said quietly. "You used to sneak me those after dinner when Mom wasn't looking." I chuckled. "You always had a sweet tooth." She looked down at her hands, then up at me. "I don't agree with what they did. I don't think it's fair. And I don't want to be like them." I nodded slowly. "You're not." She hesitated. "Can I come visit sometimes? Maybe help with the garden here? You can visit as often as you want." She smiled. "Good. Because I miss the stories. And I miss Grandma." Her voice cracked a little at that last part. I reached out and took her hand, rough and small. "So do I. Every day." And in that moment, I realized something. Family isn't always blood. And sometimes, the ones worth holding on to aren't the ones you raised, but the ones who still see you clearly. That night, after she left, I sat by the window and looked at the stars. I whispered to Marjorie again, like I always did when I didn't know what else to do. "I think we're going to be okay." And for the first time since all this began, I believed it. After Emma's visit, something inside me shifted. Not in a loud, triumphant way, but in the quiet way roots begin to take hold in soil that once felt dry. She came back 2 days later, this time with a sketchpad and a list. "I've been thinking," she said, sitting cross-legged on the floor of my little church room. "You remember how Grandma used to read to the neighborhood kids every Thursday?" "Of course," I smiled. "She used to call it her tiny book church." "Well," Emma said, flipping her notebook around to show me a drawing of the old house, "what if we started something like that again? But bigger. For veterans, kids, people who need a place to feel safe." I blinked. "You're talking about the house?" She nodded. "It doesn't have to stay a battlefield. It can be something better. Something alive." For a moment, I was speechless. She wasn't trying to give the house back to me. She was trying to give it forward. "I've already talked to my friend Ava," she said quickly. "She works at the local community center. Says we could use part of the house for literacy programs or senior workshops. The rest could be a kind of drop-in center." I stared at her, this girl with her grandmother's fire and her own quiet strength, and something inside me clicked. Maybe I'd lost my son. But not everything I had built was gone. We spent the rest of the afternoon planning, mapping rooms, listing repairs, calling a few of my old friends who still had tools and time. I wasn't alone anymore. And more importantly, I had something I hadn't had in years. A purpose. The next day, I returned to the house. Not to move back in. That ship had sailed. But to take it back, not as a residence, but as a foundation for something better. Megan answered the door, startled to see me. "You're not." "I'm not here for you," I said. "I'm here for the house." Ethan stood behind her, arms crossed. "Dad, we've already had this conversation." "No," I said. "You talked. I listened. That's not a conversation." He opened his mouth, but I held up the envelope. "This is a legal notice. As of last week, I've transferred the property deed to a non-profit. The house is no longer under my name. It belongs to Marjorie's Legacy Foundation, a literacy and community program chartered with state approval." Megan's jaw dropped. "You can't just." "I can. And I did." She stepped forward. "What about us? Where are we supposed to go?" I looked at Ethan. "You're grown. You'll figure it out." For once, he didn't argue. He just looked down at the floor, hands in his pockets, quiet. Not from guilt, not from shame, but maybe from realization. "You have 2 weeks to vacate," I added. "There's a team coming in after that to start renovations." Then I turned and walked away. I didn't look back. Over the next few days, word spread about the transformation. The local paper ran a small story: "Veteran repurposes home as community center in wife's honor." Neighbors came by to drop off old books, paint supplies, chairs. Kids from the nearby school offered to help with yard work. The same garden Megan had planned to strip was now being replanted with flowers Marjorie once loved: zinnias, lavender, climbing roses. I found an old chest in the garage filled with her things: crochet hooks, faded aprons, letters from kids she had tutored over the years. Emma and I turned it into a memorial shelf in the front hallway, with a plaque that read, "Welcome to Marjorie's Hearth, where stories live and grow." On opening day, over 30 people showed up. Veterans, teachers, parents, even a few folks who hadn't spoken to me in years. We had tea, cookies, readings for the kids, and a small music corner set up with an old record player spinning Marjorie's favorite jazz albums. Someone tapped me on the shoulder around midday. It was Ava, the community coordinator Emma had spoken to. "You know," she said, "we've needed something like this for a long time." I nodded. I think I did too. Later that afternoon, while cleaning up, I found Ethan's old baseball glove in the back shed, dusted, cracked, but still intact. I held it for a moment, remembering the sound of ball against leather, his laughter echoing down the driveway. I thought about giving it back. But I didn't. Some things belong to the past. Others, to the present. And this house, our house, was finally moving forward. 2 weeks passed, and the house felt full again, not with noise, but with energy. Laughter from the reading room, the scratch of pencils during poetry workshops, children's footsteps racing down the hall Marjorie once mopped in slippers. Every corner of the house breathed life in a way I hadn't felt in years. But not everyone had vanished. I spotted Ethan's car one afternoon parked across the street. He didn't get out. Just sat there, engine running, watching from behind the wheel. I saw the shape of his shoulders, still familiar, still small somehow. He came back the next day, and the next. I didn't wave. One Saturday morning, just before we opened the doors for a weekend story circle, someone knocked gently at the back entrance. It was Megan. Her hair was pulled into a tight bun, her eyes shielded by large sunglasses. She held a white envelope in one hand. "Can we talk?" she asked. I stepped outside and shut the door behind me. We stood near the garden, where the roses Marjorie planted decades ago had just begun to bloom again. Megan looked around, then down at the envelope. "I'm not here to ask for anything," she said, voice quiet. "I just wanted to say. I know I pushed too far." I said nothing. "I thought I was protecting Ethan," she added. But I realize now, I wasn't. I was managing him. And managing you. Still, I waited. She handed me the envelope. That's from him. He couldn't bring himself to say anything in person. I took it, but didn't open it. She hesitated. You don't have to forgive us. I know, I said. I just wanted you to know I never hated you. I just didn't know what to do with someone who didn't bend. I looked her in the eye for the first time in what felt like years. I bent plenty. What I stopped doing was breaking. She nodded once. Then turned and walked away. That afternoon, Emma helped me hang new drapes in the reading room. We played old records, the kind Marjorie used to hum along to, and made sandwiches for the kids. Around 3, Harold came by with 3 folding chairs and a stack of mystery novels. By 4, the house was buzzing, new faces, familiar smiles, people who called me Mr. H, kids who ran to hug me like I was family. In a way, they were. Later that evening, I sat on the porch as the sun dipped low, painting the walls in orange and gold. The house had never looked more beautiful. That's when Ethan showed up. No car this time. Just him, walking slow up the front path like a boy who'd stayed out too late. I didn't get up. He stopped at the porch steps, hands in his pockets, eyes lowered. I saw what you did, he said. With the house. With the center. It's good. It's right. I nodded. He shifted. I've been thinking a lot. About things I let happen. Things I didn't say. I looked at him. You let her speak for you. I know. You watched her strip your mother's memory out of this place. He nodded again. I thought I was keeping the peace. No, I said. You were keeping your comfort. Silence stretched between us. He looked like he might turn around. Then he sat on the porch step, hands clasped. Emma told me what she's been doing. I'm proud of her. You should tell her that yourself, I said. I will. He glanced up at me. I don't expect you to let me back in. I know. But I wanted you to know I remember, he said. I remember the pancakes. The night you sat with me when I had that fever. The way Mom used to laugh when you danced in the kitchen. I blinked. Slowly. The memories cut like glass, sharp, bright, buried too long. I forgot what mattered, he said. And I let someone convince me you were in the way. I looked down at my hands, rough, veined, marked by time and labor. You don't get back what you throw away, I said. He stood. I know. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out something small. A key. To the house, he said. I took it with me without thinking. Thought I had a right to it. He held it out to me. I took it without a word. He turned and began to walk away. Halfway down the path, he paused. Tell Emma I'm proud of her, he said again. And tell Mom I'm sorry. Then he left. I sat there for a long time, key warm in my palm. Not everything needs to be opened again. But some things need to be closed the right way. I stood, went inside, and placed the key in Marjorie's old keepsake drawer. Not to be used. Just to be remembered. The next few weeks passed with a gentleness I hadn't felt in years. The center was thriving, 2 reading groups, a veterans lunch on Fridays, and Saturday story hours for the local kids. Evenings were spent on the porch with Emma, sipping weak coffee and stronger memories. I had found a rhythm again. Not the one I once had, but a new one. A softer, sturdier beat. And then, one Thursday afternoon, a knock came at the back door. It wasn't Megan. It wasn't Ethan. It was a boy, young, maybe 10. Big eyes, messy hair, holding a worn paperback in both hands. Hi, he said. Are you the man who used to live here? I smiled gently. I still do. In a way. He looked nervous. My dad said I should bring this back. He borrowed it years ago and never returned it. He said it was yours. He held out the book. The Old Man and the Sea. My copy. My name faintly scrawled on the inside cover. I hadn't seen it in years. Thank you, I said, taking it slowly. He also said, he's sorry. I nodded. Tell him I heard him. The boy left, kicking stones down the driveway. I turned the book over in my hands, thumbing the dog-eared pages, remembering the afternoons I read it to Ethan. He used to sit cross-legged on the carpet, eyes wide, whispering, he's so stubborn. Just like you. I never thought I'd miss that voice. I placed the book on the shelf in the reading room. Not to keep, but to share. Later that week, Emma came by with fresh baked banana bread and news. Dad called me, she said. He wants to meet. No pressure. He wants to talk. I nodded. You going to? She shrugged. Maybe. He's got some learning to do first. I smiled. You're your grandmother's child, through and through. That Sunday, after most of the guests had left and the house was quiet again, I sat in the hallway near Marjorie's memorial corner. I liked to sit there when the day was done. Felt like she was close. That's when I heard the door creak open. I looked up. Ethan stood there, just him, no Megan, no dramatics. He wore an old flannel, sleeves rolled to the elbows like he used to when we worked in the yard together. I won't stay long, he said. I nodded. Come sit. He hesitated, then eased down onto the bench across from me. We sat facing each other, the way we hadn't in years. He looked around the house, his eyes scanning the familiar walls made new again. It's strange, he said. It looks different. But it feels more like home than it did in years. That's because people love it now, I said. Not just live in it. He nodded slowly. I've been doing some thinking. I hope so. I was so afraid of becoming you, he said. Old, tired, stuck in place. I thought if I let you go, I wouldn't become what I feared. And instead, you became someone who forgot who carried you. His eyes watered slightly. I don't deserve this visit. No, I said honestly. But you made it anyway. That counts for something. He stared at his hands. I hurt you. You let me be hurt, I corrected. There's a difference. And the second one's worse. A beat passed. Do you hate me? He asked quietly. No, I said, my voice low. But I no longer make room in my life for people who need forgiveness more than they need change. He swallowed hard. I don't know how to change. I looked him in the eye. Start by listening to people when they say they're in pain. And then, stay. He nodded. Wiped at his face with the back of his hand. I saw the garden, he said. Mom would have loved it. She's in it, I said. In every bloom. Every petal. He stood after a while, glanced around once more. I don't expect a second chance. I know, I said. That's why you've got one. He blinked. I do? To visit. To help. To show up. That's all. He smiled faintly. That's more than I deserve. I stood, opened the door for him. Then earn it. He walked out into the fading light. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. But I did feel something loosen inside me. A knot that had lived there too long. Would you have let your child back in? Share your thoughts below. The house is alive now. You can hear it in the creak of the porch under new feet, in the soft murmur of children reading aloud, in the kettle always just about to whistle. There's music again, old jazz, hymns, laughter. There are handprints on the windows from little ones, and boots by the door from volunteers who stay late just to help. Marjorie's hearth isn't just a name. It's a promise. Every week, we welcome strangers who leave as family. Veterans come for story circles. Teens come to tutor kids. Neighbors drop off books, meals, memories. The walls that once echoed with tension now hold warmth. Forgiveness didn't fix everything. But purpose filled the cracks. Emma runs the schedule now. She handles donations, coordinates workshops. Sometimes I just watch her work, head down, focused. She's the echo of everything good in this bloodline. Ethan visits sometimes. Not often, and never for long. He brings a pie. Fixes a hinge. Sits in silence. He knows the door's open, but not wide. That's how healing works, I've learned. Not with grand gestures. But with quiet truth. Sometimes, late at night, I sit in the garden with a blanket over my knees. I talk to Marjorie like I used to. I kept my promise, I tell her. I protected what we built. And now, it's more than ours. It's everyone's. The stars say nothing. But I think she hears me. Because every bloom still opens in the morning. And every child who giggles in this hallway keeps her spirit alive. This is no longer a house haunted by betrayal. It's a home reborn in legacy. A home that lives again. Have you ever had to protect a legacy others tried to erase? Share your story in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more true life stories.